It looks like the Eagles are bringing in one of the best pass rushers in the draft for a top 30 visit, but Howie might have to do some extra work if he wants him in Eagles green. Also, in this video, I'll explain exactly why DeVonta Smith's contract extension not only helps Philadelphia, but hurts their division rivals, and Coach Prime wants the superstar player to be an Eagle. Is that even possible? And I sat down with one of the top Eagles voices in the game to talk about the Birds. I'm Thomas Mott. This is the Thomas Mott Show. There are literally a million reasons why DeVonta Smith's contract extension this morning is such a home run move by Howie Roseman. Like, first off, it's essentially a 3-year deal as the Eagles first activated his 5th-year rookie option, meaning he'll only be paid $15.6 million this season. Then the extension begins in 2025, that goes through 2028, where he'll make basically $22.65 million a year. So basically, the Eagles inked one of the best receivers in the league for 3 years less than his teammate A.J. Brown, and also keep his cap hit way down for the entire 4 years of the extension. Meaning that Philadelphia's core 4 on offense are all at least signed through 2028. So despite how you feel about the Eagles defense, this offense is gearing up to dominate not just this year, not just next year, but for many years to come. Oh, and if you need a little icing on the cake, a few minutes after Smitty's extension, Adam Schefter tweeted that, quote, Cowboys wide receiver CeeDee Lamb isn't expected to attend the start of Dallas's voluntary offseason programs Monday while he awaits a new contract to replace the one scheduled to pay him a fully guaranteed $17 million for the upcoming 5th-year option season. So by the Eagles getting Smitty's contract done first before the other 8 wide receivers who want new deals, the Eagles will end up paying way less and force their rivals, the Cowboys, to pay way more for CeeDee Lamb, which puts the boys further into cap hell for the foreseeable future. I mean, can we just get 1,000 likes for DeVonta Smith, not only getting his bag, but being great at football, but being a great person off the football field as well, and not causing any drama inside Philadelphia? I mean, we could have Brandon Ayuk, who instead recently unfollowed the 49ers on Instagram, has hinted at wanting a trade, and wants $27 million a year, or else. Smitty, on the other hand, this offseason, he's been working out, he's been doing his thing, he gets his bag, and he'll be hosting his 3rd annual celebrity charity softball game at Coca-Cola Park in Allentown on June 29th, where you can get tickets down below in my description box, and there's a chance Josh Davis and myself will be there as well. Now, you might not have known this, but the Eagles' first OTAs officially began today, and while we're still waiting for the full list of players who attended because it is voluntary, it is just phase 1, which basically means they're going to have meetings and lift weights, no actual football practices, helmets on just yet. But my guess is, with the new offensive defensive systems having to be put in place sooner rather than later, I think a vast majority of the Birds will attend these voluntary workouts, and the fact they're already being held earlier this year than they have during any point in the Sirianni tenure, I think the Birds are going to benefit very well from getting together early and trying to figure out their new offense and defense. As I mentioned, we don't know exactly who showed up. It is voluntary, so I'm sure somebody's not going to show. I expect to have the full list some point, maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow morning. Be sure to subscribe to the show because I'm going to have that obviously on tomorrow's show. Now, there is someone who will for sure be in Philadelphia tomorrow, although it is for very different reasons. It's UCLA's star pass rusher and first-round draft prospect Laiatu Latu. Now, Latu is there for a top 30 visit, and he's widely considered at worst a top 3 pass rusher in this year's draft after having, 85 tackles, 23.5 sacks, and 2 picks over the past 2 seasons at UCLA. He's also massive and a super athletic freak at 6'5" and ran a 4.64 40 at the NFL Combine. However, as PhillyVoice.com did point out, you got to realize he suffered a serious neck injury while playing at Washington, and everyone thought his football career was seemingly over. He then transfers to UCLA, where he's thrived. 10.5 sacks, 3 forced fumbles in 2022, 13 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, and 2 picks in 2023. When you watch his highlights, it's easy to see that Latu is an extensive repertoire of pass rush moves, and he can win either on the edge or from the interior on obvious passing downs. With the Son Reddick gone, going for pass rusher is kind of a no-brainer for Philadelphia and Howie Roseman in the first round. The problem that they have is the top 3, Jared Verse, Dallas Turner, and Latu, are all probably going to go by the mid-teens, so keep an eye on Latu potentially falling due to the run at quarterback and wide receiver. If he gets to 15, 16, 17, I wouldn't be shocked if Howie Roseman pulls the trigger and moves up to grab him. Now, perhaps the strangest draft news of the day that totally doesn't really matter, but I guess I have to talk about because it's been all over the news, is that Colorado's head football coach, you might have heard of him, Deion Sanders, went on the $1 Million Worth of Game podcast and admitted that the Eagles are on the short list of teams that his son, Shedeur Sanders, and DB wide receiver Travis Hunter would be allowed to play for in the NFL, along with the 49ers, Commanders, Cowboys, Ravens, and Falcons. And this whole idea of allowing players to not go places or go other places is something that I just can't really get behind. Now, I get the whole Coach Prime, Colorado, the whole media frenzy that is there, and I get the fact that he's trying to hype up his players and get them drafted, but unless you're a superstar cornerback, which Shedeur is not there yet, I mean, watch the tape last year, the losing season wasn't that great despite not having an offensive line and what Coach Prime said, you got to be like the number 1 overall draft pick to kind of decide where you want to go. Hunter's the more likely option if the Eagles were going to draft him, but again, if you're taking taking somebody at 15 overall, they're going to go to whoever takes them. They're not going to hold out. And so choosing Philadelphia is a bit of a stretch. And I mean, sure, like I like Travis Hunter, and if you told me the Eagles can have him, then I'd take him. But right now, he's extremely raw. He needs some maturing. And again, he's not eligible for the NFL draft this year, so it doesn't really matter. He also needs to decide if he wants to be a cornerback or a wide receiver, because you can't really be a two-way player in the modern NFL. Again, it's a non-story, but it's grabbing a lot of headlines. And so do you guys want Travis Hunter? Do you care about this story at all? Let me know your thoughts on Coach Prime and this whole idea of allowing people to be Eagles down below in the comments section. Now, all the offseason moves and draft visits going on, I decided to link up with Brandon Lee Gowton, reached out to him on Twitter. He's the editor-in-chief of Bleeding Green Nation, a website I'm sure if you're an Eagles fan, you've definitely read. He's done a lot of great work for them. I wanted to bring him on and ask him a ton of Eagles questions. I think you guys are going to enjoy this conversation. Joined by a special guest, the managing editor of Bleeding Green Nation, a website that I think every Eagles fan who follows my show obviously knows and recognizes the face. Brandon Lee Gowton. Brandon, I appreciate you jumping on.
Thanks for having me, Thomas. Long-time listener, first-time guest.
There you go. That's the same thing for here. I mean, literally, I've been a BGN fan basically my entire life. When I was a younger kid, especially in high school, it was my go-to for Eagles news and still is. So I got to give you guys credit over there. It's been fantastic.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
I want to jump into the current situation in Philadelphia and this whole offseason plan that Howie Roseman is working on. I think you guys had an article there a couple of days ago detailing how this offseason has been a little different for Howie Roseman. They're getting away from rewarding older players with bigger contracts and trying to keep this, longer, older talent inside the building and just gone completely young. I mean, I think every signing or every new addition has been under the age of 27. Do you see this as a big-time shift for Howie Roseman, or do you see him kind of just slowly morphing into a guy who's willing to make changes to philosophies that he's had for a very, very long time?
Yeah, I don't think it's an accident. I think this is very much an intended kind of direction the team is taking, and something that had kind of been out there or stated after the season was over, kind of in the back channels and whatnot. So I definitely think the Eagles' offseason is certainly very intentional in that regard, especially as it applies to the Hassan Reddick trade too. So yeah, ultimately, I do think they are looking to get younger. I feel like that's part of the reason they feel like the team took a bad turn to end the season last year is some of the aging players and whatnot. So I definitely think that's an intended focus.
You mentioned the Reddick trade. That has obviously been the most polarizing move of the offseason. My comment section has been filled with probably 90-10 people who are upset that Hassan Reddick has gone, and the 10% who say, oh, well, it makes sense, and, Bryce Huff's going to be pretty good. Where do you stand on the whole Philadelphia getting rid of their leading sack man from last year?
I think it's kind of overthinking it to be like, well, if you kind of look at it and you kind of just, be like, oh, Bryce Huff could be Hassan Reddick. Well, I mean, you had the actual proven thing there. Right. And that's not to say they shouldn't have signed Bryce Huff. I just think you can have both. I think you could have made it work. I think the Eagles could have found a better way to try to make that situation work ultimately. I mean, I say this all the time, so sorry if you're listening to me say this for the 1,000,000th time again, but 4 players, or Hassan Reddick has the 4th most sacks in the NFL since the 2020 season. That's a big sample size, and I know he's getting older. But this is a guy who didn't play a ton earlier in his career, so I don't think there's as much wear and tear on him as someone typically his age. And also, I don't think he's shown any signs of slowing down. I know that a little bit colder to end the season last year, but that was literally every player on defense. And prior to the defensive coordinator change, very unnecessary defensive coordinator change that the Eagles made, Hassan Reddick was actually on pace to have an even better year in 2023 than he had in 2022. And that's also despite the fact he entered the season with that thumb injury that had him play with a cast on. So I really don't think he showed signs of slowing down.
Saquon Barkley is another move that we talk about Howie Roseman differentiating from what he's done in the past. I mean, giving money to running backs is not something that he really has done, despite him saying in press conferences recently, oh, well, I did give Shady a contract, and we paid this guy and that guy. In reality, $15 million for Saquon Barkley is a very big move. I think most Eagle fans, including myself, are excited to see how it works, how he integrates into this offense with A.J. Brown and DeVonta Smith. Do you see him having that Christian McCaffrey-type impact, or should we temper our expectations a little bit for 26?
Well, yeah, that's obviously a big. That's like the best case scenario, and you have to account for. There's a lot of possibilities, but from the worst case scenario to the best case scenario, and everything in between. I do like the theoretical vision of the Saquon Barkley signing, which I think is about what can we do to kind of make this offense, which certainly wasn't terrible in
Right.
2023, but wasn't as good as it could have been, I think is ultimately the benchmark that they came short of. So I think when you're looking at, okay, how can we get better on offense? I think the Saquon Barkley signing is an opportunity to do just that. I don't love the idea in general of, giving out big resources to running backs, but really when you look at it, it's, like a 2-year kind of deal, really, in terms of your commitment to him, basically. And I think, if Saquon can be the best version of himself, you're getting a really good player who can obviously not only help out as a runner, but in the pass catch as a pass catcher as well, as a pass blocker. So I do think there's sense to it ultimately.
You mentioned the Eagles' epic collapse at the end of last year, that final 7-game stretch where it wasn't just Hassan Reddick who played bad. You said it. Everybody played absolutely terrible. And, of course, the defensive coordinator change didn't help. But I think a lot of Eagle fans are still very bitter towards keeping Sirianni. And that was something that I really championed hard, that I had seen enough. And I loved Sirianni. I mean, you go back to 2022, I thought he had the fire. I thought he was the next young, bright offensive mind. And then everything that went down in 2023 really just turned me off. And I don't see how he was able to keep his job other than the fact that they sat him down and said, hey, you just kind of sit over here in the corner and be the head coach, and we're going to bring in some adults, that coordinator, to go ahead and fix the issue. Do you believe in Nick Sirianni? Do you think he's on a very short leash? Where are you at on the head coach right now?
I think I'm in a spot where I believe Nick Sirianni is not going to hold the team back from being competitive at all. I don't think it's a matter of they're going to be a disaster just like they were at the end of last year. I think they will be better than that. I think the question is, what is their ceiling with Nick Sirianni? And you can say, well, they went to the Super Bowl, and sure, they did. But I also think when it comes to what Nick Sirianni specifically does, I worry about that, because while they did go to the Super Bowl, I think that was in large part based on the talent on their roster. And as someone who's been very critical of Howie Roseman in the past, I think it's very big of me to admit that, I think that's more of a Howie Roseman kind of victory, and he deserves a lot more of the credit for that, and actually got it in terms of being executive of the year again, as opposed to, Sirianni taking a team that everyone thought didn't have as much talent and overachieved. That's what a good coach typically kind of does at a very simple level, is taking what you have and making it better, getting the most out of it. And we clearly didn't see that last year with the offense. I just talked about that. And I think ultimately it comes down to, what does Nick Sirianni provide for this team? What edge does he give to this Eagles team? How does he take less and get more out of it? And I just don't think we have enough evidence to support that he does a great job of that, or there's something you can really hang your hat on. I would say, if anything, in the past, it's been the culture, which you kind of just touched on a little bit there. But the culture was so bad last year that I'm starting to wonder if that's really something that you can champion moving forward.
When we look at Howie Roseman getting into the NFL draft, there's a very interesting, I think it was just a tweet I saw yesterday from Derek Gunn mentioning that the Eagles are looking for plug-and-play starters with their first-round draft pick, which most teams are, but every now and then you get draft picks that, like Nolan Smith, for example, was not supposed to be a plug-and-play starter. He was really going to be a project where you hope he does give you something with a 30th overall draft pick, but really year 2, year 3, that's where you expect him to go. Do you have somebody in mind at number 22 or via trade-up that you have decided this is the perfect draft pick for Philadelphia? Because I don't know how y'all's comment section is, but mine is torn with about 9 different players who is the perfect pick for Philadelphia, which is kind of how it is each year. But I'm curious if you've zoned in on somebody who you really like.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a bigger theme with the draft this year, too. I think it feels like, at least more than ever, there's really uncertainty about how the board is going to shake out, especially with all the, the quarterback uncertainty that there is going on, all the potential trade-ups that could happen. It kind of just feels like, again, more than most years, this class is very fluid. So then it's kind of hard to project, who's even going to be there.
Right.
The Eagles potentially could be on the board. It also is a draft class that seems to be kind of considered weaker in terms of the depth of the class. And obviously the Eagles have a history of making trades, especially up the board. So I think that's kind of your move, especially compared to most years where, okay, you might want to trade back, get some more draft capital. But if it's a weaker class, I think that's not the play. I think the play would be anything to be the move up. So it's hard to really kind of see who exactly fits. I think in terms of what I would like the Eagles to do, I think there's a decent chance that someone like Cooper DeJean could be on the board there. I think a cornerback obviously is an immediate position, like you just talked about with Derek Gunn there, referencing that. What I think the Eagles will do is a little different, and I think there is some sense to it. I think offensive tackle is really going to be in play, especially because I think there's too many good offensive tackles in this class for them to not have a good option there wherever they're picking. And I know that's not necessarily immediate starter if he can't play at right guard, which possibly can. We'll see about that. But the idea that the Eagles are just going to be comfortable with what they have now, offensive tackle behind Jordan Mailata and Lane Johnson, I just don't think is true because it's currently like Fred Johnson or Tyler Steen, maybe. We don't even know for sure. And also, I think if you look at it from the negative standpoint, you would say, okay, you're drafting a guy who isn't even doesn't have a clear path to playing time for at least 1 year, maybe two. The best case scenario is that, hey, if that guy's not playing, it means Jordan Mailata and Lane Johnson are staying healthy, which you will certainly sign up for.
Yeah, I mean, as I look at this draft class and I read all the different news articles that come out around Philadelphia, and this reporter says that, and that reporter says this, it's going to be very hard for the Eagles to not get an offensive lineman just sitting there at 22, because as you mentioned, it's a very strong tackle draft. You know they're going to need it eventually, and while myself and a lot of other Eagle fans think defense, plug-and-play starter in the secondary makes a lot of sense right now, Howie has shown you time and time again that offensive line is his true love, along with defensive line, and it would just be very, very on par if they just go, best tackle available, come on in, maybe he can swing over to guard if possible, and if not, we just wait for Lane Johnson to go ahead and retire, which hopefully didn't happen, like you said, for a very long time. I want to throw some names out here that are also popping up a lot in terms of Philadelphia, and just get your take on potentially them being a first-round draft pick for the Eagles. Brock Bowers is very polarizing, and he's gotten kind of a little bit of a run. I don't know if it's just in my comment section, but I've seen him all over Twitter this week, like people saying, you've got to get Brock Bowers because he's this generational tight end, and how can you not pass up on someone who makes the offense better? I'm very much out on Brock Bowers. I've mentioned that on my show. Are you the same way, or do you see some potential there with a tight end pick?
Yeah, I don't think he'll be there. And if he's as good as everyone says he is, he probably shouldn't be there on the board when the Eagles are picking. Yeah. But yeah, I do agree that while it could be fun in theory when you're looking at your, like Bleacher Report graphic of who's stopping this offense, all the Eagles players there, that looks nice on paper. I get it.
It does.
It's fun in Madden. I think the reality of it, though, isn't as exciting when you get to the regular season and then there's only so many targets to go around anyway. And how do you incorporate this guy? And some of the really, and this isn't the only reason to blame. I'm not saying 12 personnel is totally bad. That does have a place. But when you go too heavy on it, you kind of resemble those 2018, 2019 Eagles offenses, which really just lacked any kind of explosiveness. And, it's a nice tool to have, but when your offense is built around that, don't quite love that. So yeah, I don't think it's the most likely thing. And I think that's more of a luxury pick where I don't think you really can afford that luxury.
You mentioned Cooper DeJean. He's also a name that gets thrown around a lot. Philadelphia is seemingly very interested in him as a versatile secondary player. There's this stigma going around that he can't play cornerback on the outside and that he's really going to be kind of a hybrid safety. And do you want him with the 22nd overall draft pick? I believe you're pretty high on DeJean, though, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I like the athleticism. I like the profile. Obviously, he has some returning ability as well, which is not the main reason to draft him, but it's a nice little extra box to check that to be able to have that in there. So, yeah, I just think that he's going to be able to find a role somewhere, whether that's on the outside or at safety, playing nickel sometimes. I just think you're going to be able to find a spot for him in your secondary. And obviously, they don't have many safeties on the roster right now between Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, who's here on a multi-year deal. They just signed Reed Blankenship to an extension. So, that's a position where they can still add some more talent. And if, again, things don't work out at corner, which if they do, great. And if not, that's a nice fallback to have.
Let's say Philadelphia doesn't go defense first round. Let's say they go offensive line, and then they have some defensive pieces in the later rounds who can be, future projects. The current Eagles defense, if they were to suit up today, are they better than they were last year just due to coaching or overall due to personnel?
Yeah, that's a good question, Thomas. I would say worse. Because Hassan Reddick is a big loss, I think, ultimately, especially, too, for – not to harp on that again, but just for a pass rush that really wore down last year.
Yeah.
And I'm optimistic about Nolan Smith. There's nothing against him. I'm probably higher on him than I should be based on how he didn't really show a whole lot in year one. But I think worse in part because Hassan Reddick is gone. I do think, obviously, anyone would agree that Vic Fangio is an upgrade from both Sean Desai and Matt Patricia. So that's nice and all. But at the end of the day, you have to have the right players. You have to have a potent pass rush. And it's not that I think the Eagles are going to be, a terrible defense, but I do think they're a little bit worse. And honestly, that's actually not the end of the world. I think with what you're looking for ultimately is to get to a point on defense with the Eagles where it's respectable and the offense is kind of carrying the team. I think that's a realistic vision for this squad.
You do, and in Bleeding Green Nation, do a lot of stuff with our NFC East opponents. RJ Ochoa is a mutual friend that you obviously talk with a lot. When you look at the Washington Commanders sitting there at number 2, and this whole quarterback deal you mentioned earlier with, I think you got 4 in the first 4 picks. I think Bo Nix and potentially Michael Penix sneak into the first round as well. Who do you not want Washington to take? Are you of this opinion that Jaden Daniels makes the Commanders really, really good, or are you more scared of Drake May?
Yeah, it's a good question. Friend is a a liberal term for what I would call RJ Ochoa, but no, he does great work for blocking the boys. I would say that Jaden Daniels scares me the most from the upside swing potential. I think there's a chance that he might not work out. Frame is very slight. You wonder about that. But I also think you look at some of these numbers. I just saw one today that he's one of the most accurate downfield passes of 25 plus yards. And I just think you look at it as obviously as athletic tools and his ability. And I think that if that does work out, that's scary. That has the potential to kind of be a needle mover in the NFC East, as opposed to maybe more of a safe pick that they could make there with someone who might have a higher floor but doesn't have as high of a ceiling. So if they take a big swing on upside, that's what I don't want them to do.
Yeah, I feel very, very similar. I mean, Drake May to me is a massive gamble. It feels like, I think Merle Hodge had the quote the other day saying he's the kind of guy that gets you fired if you go ahead and take him. And so if I'm one of the Commanders to look bad, then that would be who I would want them to take. It feels like it's going to be Caleb Williams, then Jaden Daniels, then the Patriots will go Drake May, and then whoever wants to come up to number 4 to take J.J. McCarthy, despite. I don't see it. I mean, again, you go back and watch the Michigan tape. He wasn't bad, but he wasn't the reason they won the national championship game. Do you feel the same way that McCarthy is 4 to Denver or the Giants or the Raiders?
Yeah, I think the Giants are drafting a quarterback. I think that's going to happen. Okay. I mean, they kind of have to. I mean, they don't have to in terms of Daniel Jones is still there, but I think they very clearly are not in on him. And I think they would like to turn the page, kind of reset the clock. I think if you're Brian Dable and Joe Schoen, you look at this as an opportunity. And whereas if you just stick with Daniel Jones, I mean, maybe you're fired by the end of the season because you don't have any hope to sell to the front office and the fan base. Whereas if you take the quarterback, well, it's like, okay, well, maybe we're pivoting into this new era, and it kind of gives you more of a leash. So I think they kind of have to do that, both because of the interest of the GM and the head coach, and also because you have to take a chance on upside and get better than what you have in Daniel Jones. So I do think that's going to happen. And yeah, it could be a trade up to 4 or even higher maybe.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see how these quarterbacks go and what it does for some of the top defensive and offensive line talent that gets shoved down the line further for Philadelphia. Maybe they're at 22 or with a trade up, and obviously it's happening in a couple of weeks. We're going to find out there pretty soon. I want to ask one Jalen Hurts question here, and the Jalen Hurts criticism last year is really hard for me to get behind, just simply due to the fact that the offense was as vanilla as possible. You guys at BGN did a lot of really great articles just detailing how bad it really was under Brian Johnson, whether that's Sirianni's fault or whether it's Brian Johnson's fault. And it's not to, take away from the turnovers that Jalen Hurts inevitably threw. But do you have more pressure going on Hurts this season or more pressure going on Kellen Moore to make this offense not look like a high school offense, which I think was a headline for somebody, I forget who it was, during the course of the 2023 season?
Yeah, I think ultimately it's on Hurts. This is a guy who has been paid over $250 million. So, and not to make it as simple as that, but I kind of do at the end of the day look at, the offensive coordinator is being paid like $1 million or so, somewhere around there. And it's not, quite as simple as the quarterback is 250 times more important. It's not necessarily that direct of a ratio, but the point being, if you're going to pay a guy $250 million, then that guy has to perform. And I think certainly Jalen Hurts was not helped every possible way he could have been last year. But like you said, I think there were some things that he has to own as well. And based on some of the reporting, that we've done at Bleeding Green Nation and has been out there, I think there are valid criticisms when it comes to not only leadership in terms of, like his play style and playing with emotion and whatnot, but also some of the time dedicated to improving and whatnot. There's been a lot of chatter about Jalen Hurts being pulled in kind of different directions last offseason after coming off such a stellar year in 2022, obviously. So I think, kind of having this extra time now to learn from that and be humbled and focus on his craft. Obviously, I'm not questioning Jalen Hurts' work ethic. He works extremely hard. But I think this offseason, I think he kind of will find a better balance between doing some of those promotional things and working on his game and really stressing the importance of that to himself and knowing he needs to commit in that way. So ultimately, I think, it's on Jalen Hurts to get it done. And I feel optimistic that he certainly will have a better year in 2024 than he did last year.
Every offseason for Philadelphia is headline news. They always make some sort of big move here and there. They've done a lot of that so far, but it's going to be very interesting to see what they do the next couple of weeks between a Smitty extension, between the NFL draft, and, of course, getting ready for a loaded OTA season and then into training camp. So we'll be following it, obviously, here, and you guys at Bleeding Green Nation. Brandon, I appreciate you jumping on. Always been a fan. I look forward to having you guys back on the show here soon.
Appreciate you having me. I want to give a shout out to my friend David, who is a big time listener and watcher of yours. So shout out to David, who may or not be watching this.
There you go. David, we shout out to you as well. I appreciate it. Brandon, we'll talk to you soon.
Absolutely.
We got plenty more stuff happening the next couple of days and weeks. Make sure you guys subscribe. It's going to be a fascinating, next 2.5 weeks. We get closer to the NFL draft, plus OTA coverage as well. One-stop shop right here. I'm Thomas Mott. This has been the Thomas Mott Show.